Welcome to my show. Today is 2nd of December 2020, and on my YouTube channel we are doing a special edition about the recent developments in the Middle East, more particularly nuclear scientist Mr. Dr. Mohsen Fakhrizadeh. Now, in this debate, Albania is an important country because Albania hosts a large paramilitary terrorist organization called the Mojaheden el Halk. We are aware of the conflict that exists between Iran on one side, who defends the rights of Palestinians, and on the other hand, we have the United States and Israel who are working day and night to destroy the existence of the Palestinian people. And in this equation, we have Iran, which is a major supporter of the so-called axis of resistance. On the 27th of November, we had a major development. We had the killing of a top Iranian scientist, and Iranian government officials are claiming that behind this killing was Israel and the Mojaheden el Halk terrorist organization, which is hosted by Albania. Today we're doing an interview with very well-known journalists. We have a journalist from Canada, Mr. Robert Fantina, who is a well-known activist on issues of human rights, anti-war movement, and so forth. And we have Mr. Leonid coming and joining us from Russia. Mr. Leonid, he is the chief editor of Geopolitical.ru, and he's a major contributor to issues that deal with the Middle East. So without any further ado, I would like to invite my guests. And my first question goes to Mr. Leonid. What do you think about the recent assassination of Dr. Mohsen Fakhrizadeh?
Of course, we all in Russia see it like a terroristic attack. And that is not new for Iran and for Russia, because many scientists in Iran were assassinated before. First information was about Israeli agents, and second flow of information connected with that maybe United States began this attack. And last night I read news that there are kind of some leaks or rumors that maybe Azerbaijani agents also involved in the assassinations. So it's mostly about kind of description of the event. And in Russia, no any serious investigation who maybe behind it, just blame about Zionist activity and about attempts of deep state of United States to provoke conflict in the Middle East. And actually in Russia there are no information about Mojaheden el Halk organization because traditionally Russia focused on another types of terroristic organization like Islamic State, like Al-Qaeda, and some domestic groups, for example, Emirat Kafkas. And Mojaheden el Halk mostly not presented inside of Russian information sphere. So I think there should be kind of investigation, just to give more facts about activity of this terrorist group, how it connected with some politician of United States, how this organization connected with Albania, and especially how connected with terroristic activity inside of Islamic Republic of Iran.
All right. Uh, in a case of, because we know that the killing of Mr. Fakhrizadeh was done probably in a way by Israel to use the Trump administration to launch a war against Iran. In a case of conflict between Iran and Israel and the United States, what do you think, sir? In which side will Russia stand?
Of course, we are partners with the Islamic Republic of Iran for the moment. We are in the same camp because we are suffering from the sanctions imposed by the West and mostly the United States of America. So we support each other, and now we develop our cooperation in different spheres, in economics and trade, and some Russian experts and specialists come to Iran for industry sector, oil refinery sector, and etc. And we developed our military cooperation with Islamic Republic of Iran. So I think from point of view of last few years and planned strategy of the Russia for next years, of course, we will be on side of Islamic Republic of Iran.
You mentioned that you read some information that probably some Azerbaijanis were involved in this terrorist attack. Can you elaborate a bit more on that?
No, it's just only mentioned that maybe some Azerbaijani against. I think there is kind of a background because Azerbaijan with Israel many years before. For example, Israel looking on Azerbaijan like space to attack Iran in case of possible local or regional war many years ago. And last conflict in Nagorno-Karabakh also showed that there is good cooperation between Israel and Azerbaijan because Azerbaijan have some weapon systems takes from Turkey and also from Israel. So I think there may be kind of secret cooperation between the two countries.
Mr. Savin, I do not know how much you follow the Iran news in Europe, but for me as an Albanian journalist and historian, following what MEK is doing out of Albania, in the past 2 years, the Mojahedeens have been very good on spreading fake news about Iran. For example, in March 2018, MEK claimed that Iran wanted to kill the Mojahedeens here in Albania. It was a total fake news. Me and an Albanian journalist, Gjergj Thanasi, we investigated the story, and it was fake story. We had 2 Iranian journalists who were in Albania, part of a greater group of foreigners who came for a congress on the history of Imam Ali, who is celebrated by the Muslim community here. But what MEK did, they published the fake news as if these 2 journalists, Iranians, were terrorists. And even though they were detained by Albanian police and they were found innocent and they were left free, MEK published this news, and this news then was tweeted by Secretary of State Mike Pompeo. Now, parallel with this, in 2018, if I'm not wrong about the year, we had an Iranian diplomat, his name was Asadullah Assadi, who was detained in Belgium, and MEK claimed that he wanted to do a terrorist attack against the jihadi organization of Maryam Rajavi, who was organizing an event in Paris. My suspicion here from Albania, by knowing the modus operandi of the Mojahedeens, is that this should also be fake news. The American government, administration of Trump, CIA, is using MEK as it was using fake leftist groups during the Cold War in the Operation Gladio, if you are aware of it, by making fake or false flag operations in order to blame the Soviet Union. I do not know what is your opinion on this.
Yes, we are familiar with actually fake news propaganda organized by some countries or some groups. And personally, I know about this situation with detention of Iranian diplomats because we published a short article on English page of geopolitical.ru. But in Russian media, they know any kind of information about Mojaheden el Halk, as I told you. Of course, there are some monitoring groups who are looking for any kind of fake news inside of Russia, and especially in Russian language. But it's mostly focused on Ukraine, on Belarus because of crisis for the moment, on Syrian issues and south of Caucasus, and of course activity of West-funded organization, and also well known like Voice of America, for example, who produce many fake news against Russia and about Russian personalities, especially politicians. But it will be interesting to add this group to the list of producer of the fake news, and I think your information will be useful for this reason.
Mr. Savin, my last question to you, because I understand that you are short of time. Now, the Balkans in 2012 and 13 was used as a harvesting ground by CIA and Americans and Saudis to recruit many local Muslims and to send them as jihadis to Syria. We have information here in Albania, and I think even Sputnik News published it, that during the conflict in Donbass in Ukraine, a number of Albanian mercenaries went to join the Ukrainian forces against the native Russians. Do you have any information about that?
Personally, I not heard about Albanian mercenaries, but only about Croatians who was on Ukrainian side, and about Israeli citizens also on Ukrainian side. But we have enough contact with representative of Donbass and Lugansk People Republic, and we can get easy this information about exactly from which countries of Balkan regions or European countries participated in this conflict on Ukrainian side. There are also some participants from Italy and from Sweden on Ukrainian side, like mercenaries. And also they maybe done some war crimes in this region.
All right. Thank you very much, Mr. Savin.
You're welcome.
Okay, Mr. Fantina, what is your opinion about the recent killing of Dr. Fakhrizadeh? What do you think is behind it?
Well, it's certain that Israel actually pulled the trigger, so to speak, but it either did it at the behest of or with the full complicity and consent of the United States. The United States, since the beginning of the Trump administration, has worked hard to do anything it could to destabilize Iran, to thwart its nuclear program. The U.S. under the previous president, Barack Obama, had of course entered into JCPOA, which monitored Iran's nuclear development programs in exchange for removal of sanctions, which enabled Iran to enjoy trade with the rest of the world unrestricted mainly. Of course, Iran has always said that the Iranian government spokespeople have always said that their nuclear program is for peaceful purposes. So the assassination, this shocking and by international law illegal assassination, was in all likelihood performed by Israeli agents with the full consent and complicity of the United States.
Right. Now, how do you see the role of my country, Albania, in this event? I mean, Albania is hosting a large Mojaheden army against all international conventions, breaking even our penal code. I have very often been on Albanian public TVs here, and me and other journalists will have been protesting the presence of this illegal group in my country, which makes calls for war and jihad. And by the way, me and you were both Canadians, and we know what happens, let us say, if a group of people like this will exist in Canada and will send foreign fighters to a foreign country and will make calls for jihad. We know in Canada, CSEC and security services, they are going to arrest these people and going to send them to jail. Even Albanian laws, which are quite reasonable for this, people who joined the so-called Syrian jihad, they were detained and jailed. But when it comes to the issue of the Mujahideens, they have permission from our government, and our government does not implement the law. And on the other hand, we have top American politicians, people from Rudy Giuliani to the late John McCain, John Bolton, who have continuously come to Tirana praising the Mujahideens for their jihad against Iran. Why are these double standards, and why you think Albania is being misused in such a way?
The government of Albania is, in all likelihood, under strong pressure from the United States to allow the members of the MEK to remain there and to be active there. As you mentioned, Albania law prevents these sorts of activities, but those laws are not enforced against the MEK, and we need to go back to the source of the problem, which in many regards is the United States. So it's U.S. pressure on Albania that is probably Albania from acting. Regarding the support that the MEK receives from United States elected and appointed officials, John Bolton is another one you didn't mention, former national security advisor to President Trump, who is a supporter of the MEK. He has said that by the 40th anniversary of the Islamic Revolution, he would be dancing in the streets of Tehran. That, of course, did not happen. He and many others underestimate the loyalty of the Iranian people to their nation. But the United States will do anything, and that has been proven time and again, to support Israel. It overlooks, the same way that Albania overlooks the crimes that MEK is committing within Albanian borders, the United States overlooks the crimes that Israel commits. The international violations of the human rights of the Palestinians, the continued home demolitions, extrajudicial killings, the increasing settlements, the separate laws in Israel for Israelis and Arabs. These are all in violation of international law. The United States allows these to happen and in fact finances them. So the parallel, I think, is clear. The United States will support human rights when it is convenient, when it is politically expedient for the United States to do so, when it advances some of the U.S.'s geopolitical goals. However, if any country violates human rights and international law, but serves the United States in some other way, then the United States will tolerate those extreme and shocking and brutal violations. So I think that's partly what's happening in Albania, and why the Albanian government continues to support, or at least allow, the MEK to operate freely within its borders.
Mr. Fantina, Albania is a very fragile country. There are accusations, if you read the WikiLeaks, for example, that many politicians that we have in this country are part of the organized mafia, and Albania is a major hub of drug smuggling in Europe. And our politicians, they are like Somoza in Panama. The Americans know who they are, but they don't touch them for as long as they serve to their policies. But now, with the killing of Dr. Fakhrizadeh, and if the Iranian government is going to prove that it was MEK who coordinated with Israel his assassination, Albania might become a target of the Iranian army. Do you think that Iran might attack the Ashraf camp here in Albania like it did when the MEK camp was in Iraq?
This is definitely a possibility. We have to remember that the Iranian government will act very carefully, will have a very measured response. The Iranian government does not want to risk its own people, but it will want to justly address this horrific assassination. The possibility of its invading the Ashraf camp is certainly great. The Iranian government, again, rightly and justly, sees the camp as a threat to the peace and security of the nation. The MEK doesn't have much power in and of itself, but backed by the United States and Israel, it does have power. And by eliminating the camp and the members there, Iran would take a step towards maintaining its own peace and security, which any government has an obligation to do for its people. The Iranian government would certainly confer with its allies first to assure that they were in agreement with the action, and then would act in a very direct way, but being careful not to expand the attack to any area beyond the Ashraf camp. Iran, unlike the United States and Israel, will work to prevent a wider war from occurring in the Middle East.
Mr. Fantina, the Mojahedeens, they are depicted as the so-called democratic opposition of the government of Iran. We know that this is nonsense because Iran is a democracy. They are a theocratic democracy. They have a parliament, they have elections. On the other hand, MEK, from our investigation here in Albania, is in no way a democratic organization. It is a totalitarian cult. They abuse their members, abuse their human rights. In 2018, we had a Canadian family here, the family of Mustafa Mohammadi, who wanted to liberate their daughter, a Canadian resident, who has been taken from Toronto since when she was 17 years old. Her name is Sumaya Mohammadi. And what we witnessed during the presence of the Mohammadi family, who were trying to rescue their daughter from this jihadi camp and send her to live the comfortable life of GTA, where her family lives in Canada. MEK did everything in its power and did not allow the family of Sumaya to meet her. They did not allow Sumaya even to go out of the camp. She was paraded in front of cameras, reading letters like these hostages of Daesh or ISIS read letters when they are being captured in Mali or in Syria before beheaded. So she was reading letters and denouncing her family, her father, and saying, if my father takes me, he's going to send me to mullahs of Iran, even though her father was telling, daughter, come home in Toronto, not in Tehran. But what we witnessed is that this organization is a hostage-taking organization. In the last months, I have interviewed a number of Iranian families who want to come to Albania and to speak to their relatives, to convince them to abandon jihad, to de-radicalize themselves, to abandon violence and return home. And what MEK is doing is it is forcing these people to come on camera to attack their families, to attack even me and other Albanian journalists to talk about this. So from what we have understood about MEK is that It is in no way a democratic opposition. It is not a democratic organization, but it is a cult. And now we have this Trumpist administration, which depicts them as the Democrats, as people who will bring democracy to Iran. But these people, they are afraid even to have a discussion like me and you have. Mm-hmm. I have challenged Maryam Rajavi and the MEK command here in Albania because they insult me and accuse me, they call me a servile of the religious fascism of Iran and their terminology. But these people, they are afraid even of having a democratic and open debate. They have attacked so many medias and journalists here in Albania, blaming that they work for Iran. They have beaten journalists from Channel 4. They have attacked the BBC, Al Jazeera, The Guardian, Der Spiegel. But now these people who are, I believe Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi would be more Democrat than Maryam Rajavi. But there is a great irony in the West because many medias pretend these people as the democratic opposition of Iran.
Mm-hmm. Yes, this is certainly incongruous in many ways, because outside of the MEK itself, there is little, if any, support for it. The Iranian people do not support the MEK. There's other than the heads of some governments like the United States and Israel, there is no support for it. Even the recruitment efforts of the MEK can't be considered successful because not many people are willing to join it for many of the reasons that you have mentioned. Those that have left who have been able to leave have reported on the very things you've talked about, the repression, the inability to relate to families, the inability to move about freely. And yet the United States and some other governments will say this is the group that is going to liberate Iran, as if Iran needs liberation. This is, again, the only reason for this is because Iran is a powerful nation in a part of the country where the United States wants only Israel to be powerful. This is why the United States supports terrorists in Syria, to destabilize Syria, because it wants only Israel to have any power in that part of the world. And the Iranian people and the Iranian government aren't seeking for power over others. They're simply seeking to have a peaceful nation, to be able to ally with other countries and assist them when they need it and gain assistance from it. The MEK and the members of the MEK, Rajavi and others who lead it, are only looking for power. They have, in their perspective, been lucky that the United States has decided that they're going to support this group. Otherwise, they would have nothing going for them. They would have no financial support. They would have no positive publicity around the world. But due to the United States' desire for power in that part of the world, and its desire to have Israel as its powerful its powerful pawn in that part of the world, it will do whatever it can to attempt to destabilize Iran, and it believes that the MEK is a method of doing that. This is not realistic. The MEK is a terrorist organization, and like most terrorist organizations, has very little power. I can qualify that, though. There is one terrorist organization that has extreme power, and that is the United States of America.
Robert, in one of the last events of MEK organized here in Albania, we had even the previous Prime Minister of Canada, Stephen Harper, delivering a speech to MEK. We had even a former MP, his name is David, a very good person, I've met him personally. But the thing that keeps me wondering is, what are these Canadian politicians doing in these events run by an ex-terrorist organization, even according to the government of Canada?
Mm-hmm. Many Canadian politicians want to be in good favor with the United States. The United States is their biggest trading partner, and they are willing to compromise their own principles in order to say things and do things that they think will please the U.S. government. And of course, any support for the MEK does please the U.S. government. I can only say that they are weak because the Canadian government needs to stand on its own, needs to determine its own policies, and not play into the U.S.'s desire for power and profits around the world. The Canadian government has a reputation of being one that supports human rights and supports self-determination, but that has been compromised in the last few years, especially under the Harper regime. But Trudeau has not done nearly enough to reestablish Canada's government as a beacon of hope for human rights and international law.
I don't know if you have followed me, but last year in August I visited China, Xinjiang. And during my visit, I witnessed the way how the Chinese government treats the Muslims of Xinjiang. After coming out of China, I spoke about what I saw, and I got so much media coverage. I was even defended by Reporters Without Borders and many other international organizations for my humble opinion that I gave when I came out of Xinjiang. Now, the camps that MEK runs in Albania is not different from the camps that we have in China. However, we see a kind of total ignoring of what is happening in Albania. The world speaks about concentration camps in China, but the world doesn't speak about the Mojaheden camp that we have in Albania. I mean, we have met many defectors who are here in Tirana, who have managed to escape from this camp, and they show us horrible stories. If in China the government locks those Muslims that it considers as radicals for 2 years in these camps where they force them to learn Chinese and abandon Islam, in Albania we have people who have been taken from Iran since 20 or 30 years ago. Some of these people who are inside the Mojaheden camp, they're prisoners of war who were captured by Saddam Hussein and who, according to international law, they had to be released and sent back to their home country. Saddam Hussein gave them for free to Maryam Rajavi and Masoud Rajavi, and these people are being kept locked. Here in Tirana, Albania, we have an opposition to the Mujahideens, but the government never talks about the opposition to the opposition of the government of Iran. And the stories that they tell us are horrible. People inside the Mujahideen camp, they are not allowed to have smartphones, to have Skype, to talk to their families, to marry, to fall in love, to contact people of other sexes, to work, to earn a living, to have a pension. Nothing. They're slaves. And how can you explain this international hypocrisy when it comes to the conditions of the Mujahideens inside the MEK camp in Albania?
It is a shocking double standard, where the media in some countries will report on the abuses that you reported from China and will give lots of publicity to that, and yet will ignore the abuses that the leadership of the MEK commits against its own members. This again goes back to the power of the United States. The United States will criticize any country that it considers an enemy, any country that it considers not following its dictates and not going along with its geopolitical goals around the world. The MEK, despite its brutality, its repression, its blatant and shocking violation of the human rights of its members, does follow U.S. dictates and U.S. goals. Therefore, it is untouchable. the United States will not allow reporting to be done on it. And this is not just within the U.S.'s borders. The United States has influence on many countries in the world. We see this in another situation, whereas the abuses that Israel commits against the Palestinians, which are horrific and occur on a daily basis, these are reported in some European periodicals, but in very few media outlets in the United States is any of this reported. However, when the Palestinian people attempt any act of aggression against Israel, which is allowable under international law, and occupied people can use any methods at their disposal to resist the occupation. But any ineffectual bombing, a rocket that Hamas might fire on Israel, that gets all kinds of publicity in the United States. Look at how these people are to kill and harm this wonderful democracy of Israel. Israel is not a democracy; it's a repressive regime. But that part doesn't get published in the United States. Other countries do publish that sometimes, and there are certain media outlets in the United States that will publish it. But it's the same with MEK, because it suits the United States' purposes. We have to remember that it's a little over 10 years, I believe, that the MEK was considered a terrorist organization. However, change in U.S. government policy, change in the way they viewed Iran, caused the United States to remove them from their terrorist list, and now the U.S. is a great supporter of MEK. It's a double standard. It all goes back. It has nothing to do with international law or human rights. It goes back to the U.S.'s geopolitical goals.
Mr. Fantina, here in Albania, when Albanian politicians were trying to criticize MEK, when Albanian journalists were publishing something about their torture and imprisoning of their soldiers and other human rights abuses, the MEK military command was going and meeting our MPs and meeting journalists, and were telling to them that if you mess with us, then you are messing with the American government and with Trump. So they use so much the Trump card. They have met a number of corrupt Albanian politicians who have huge files by State Department, and they were promising to them that, look, if you support us, we're going to talk to the Trump administration on your behalf. We will help you to get American visa, and a number of lies. And Maryam Rajavi was one of the few people in the world who congratulated Trump for his election. Now, as we see, Trump is not going to be the next American president. Of course, only if Israel and MEK does not do any major incident and to provoke a war with Iran and to dismantle the American democracy. But the question is this, now that Joe Biden is coming, what do you think will happen with American policy towards MEK?
American policy toward MEK will not change substantially under a Biden administration. Although President-elect Biden has said he plans to rejoin the JCPOA, Trump, of course, is complicating that issue greatly by the sanctions and by this assassination. But Biden was vice president under Barack Obama, who signed the JCPOA, who negotiated the JCPOA. But the U.S. attitude toward Iran is that it is an enemy to Israel, and therefore any U.S. support for Iran must be very limited. So the continued actions of the MEK will get continued support from the U.S. government, simply because the U.S. government would like to see the Iranian government overthrown and a new puppet government, such as the one that the U.S. installed there prior to the Iranian Revolution. They would like to see that sort of government once again in power. This, of course, the government of the Shah of Iran was a repressive government, was terrible for the people of Iran, and the people of Iran eventually, after several decades, overthrew the government and installed the government to their liking, and a government that they approve of and want to continue. However, the will of the people of Iran is of no interest to the United States government, whether that's under a Trump administration or a Biden administration. what the U.S. wants for Iran is a puppet government installed there. The violations of the human rights and the right to self-determination of the Iranian people is unimportant. So I don't see a significant change in U.S. government policy toward MEK under a Biden administration.
My final question to you, sir, is what do you think will be the future of MEK?
I believe MEK will continue to stumble along ineffectively. MEK is having problems from the information that I've received in recruiting new members. Many of its members are elderly. They've been with the organization for some time, but it will continue to be a troublesome but ineffective tool of U.S. Policy. But I do not see it becoming sufficiently powerful to threaten the government of Iran in any way.
All right. Thank you so much for joining us. I'd like to thank you for participating in this discussion. I'd like to thank Mr. Leonid Savin as well, who joined us before. And I hope Albanian politicians are going to take a lesson from our discussion and behave themselves when it comes to international law. The recent killing of Dr. Mohsen Fakhrizadeh was a very worrisome event for the international community. It can lead to a major regional war from which we all are going to suffer. Mm-hmm. Here in Europe, we are suffering a lot from the refugee crisis because NATO bombed Syria, Libya, Afghanistan, Iraq, Somalia, Sudan, and what have you. And today, Europe is flooded with immigrants. So we have a major social and economic crisis here in Europe, this including the coronavirus problem. So we are in a total mess. So MEK is a ticking bomb. Is a ticking bomb which can probably lead the world to a world war, to the Armageddon, what the Zionist evangelicals believe in. So I very much hope that even the Americans and European security experts who analyze and see our videos, they will double think about what MEK is doing. My suggestion all along from the time when MEK came to Albania is that MEK should be de-radicalized, and moreover, my beloved country, Albania, should not be allowed to be used as a terrorism hosting country, which brings problems to other countries in the world. If the Israelis love very much MEK, I would suggest them to take them and to send them in one of their deserts around Haifa, or maybe if the Saudis love them, I would suggest them to take and host them in Najd. And if Americans love them, they are more than welcome to take them from Albania and to send them to Guantanamo, Alaska, or to Texas and wherever they want. We Albanians have no problem with Iran. We helped the Jews during the Second World War because we are a Muslim majority country and we are coming from the Ottoman Balkans. We didn't have any problem with the Israelis, and actually it was the Arnauts who saved the Jews in medieval Spain and sent them to Salonika or Thessaloniki. So we do not deserve MEK here in Albania. We do not deserve Israel to misuse Albania for its wars against the Palestinians, Iran, Syrians, and whoever they are. And moreover, we should work for peace. And MEK is not a peace-loving organization. It is a violent terrorist organization which prays for war. I hope and pray that our government, the Canadian government, my government, the Albanian government will come to their senses and will work for peace rather than for war. I also hope that the new Biden administration will restore the Iran nuclear deal and peace will prevail in the Middle East. Robert, thank you so much. I'd like to thank Mr. Savin, who left us for the wonderful discussion that we have. Thank you very much indeed. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.